Hi, today we're going to talk about why you should give a shit about settler bias. So, when I talk about settler bias, what I'm really trying to get to is how in our culture in the Maritimes we have this idea of Anglo-American superiority. And so it doesn't need to be like in the southern states where, you have Confederate flags and segregation. We're talking about this really unsubstantiated feeling of superiority in one group. So in our case, it's like the Anglo-Americans are seen as being in some way superior to the Acadians. And then in our case, where I grew up, there was that sort of attitude towards Portuguese fishermen that they were somehow less. And then there's the general idea of how Europeans are somehow superior than everybody else. And this is it expresses itself in this sort of ancestor worship, where in the last couple of days I've seen a few publications where it's kind of puzzling, where people say, we deserve to govern this fisheries because our ancestors built it with their bare hands. And they're going back to a couple of generations to their grandparents or something like this. And it's like you need to look back to, maybe, you can't go back to the beginning, but you can definitely go back to where the fisheries, really there's documentation to support how things are going. So if we go back, and we're talking about the Maritime region, there was a discovery just last year from around here, actually, First Nations settlement back to 12,000 BC. And if I were to sit here now and just sort of say representatively the last 14,000 years, I would sit here and whistle a tune, and we'd sit around, and that entire period of time, Native people are exploiting the resources of the region. So that on its own does legitimize some level of claims to being First Nations and a level of ownership of at least some of the resources here. Moving forward, we do see at about 1000 BC that there are distinct identities within the peoples who are living in North America and in this region. And to go back to Europe, really what we're looking at at that time frame is places like the Assyrian Empire and Egypt and the Phoenicians. And it's before the rise of societies like Greece and Rome. And to bring in the cultural aspect of this as a person of color, right, we have in this time frame, we're looking at people like the Cushites and the Nubians who actually, they're black people in North Africa who go in and conquer Egypt. And so really, one of the issues is how history is told, right? And most people don't know about the Nubians, or that black people ruled over Egypt at one time. And so it sort of fuels this idea of white supremacy. So as Europeans are proud of the accomplishment of their ancestors, so are everyone else. So we all have to be aware of other people's cultures. Right? And I think with the education system that we have now, we don't really see these sorts of things happening. It's starting, but there's still a lot of work to do.